I've always liked solo camping. Some people don't get it. They think it's lonely or dangerous. Maybe it is, but I've always found some peace in being out there. Just me and the woods. No distractions, no phones, no noise. Just the sound of the wind pushing through the trees, birds chirping, maybe the crackle of a fire. That's what I was chasing when I drove out to a state forest in the middle of nowhere. Not a national park. Nothing fancy. Just a big patch of woods far from town, with some old trails and a few scattered primitive campsites. I got there mid-afternoon, parked my truck on a small gravel pull-off, and slung my pack over my shoulder. The plan was simple. Hike out a few miles, find a good spot away from everything, set up camp, and enjoy the quiet. I wasn't looking for an adventure. I wasn't looking to prove anything. I just wanted some space to breathe. The first few miles of the hike were easy. The trail was worn but still visible, winding through tall pines and patches of thick underbrush. Birds fluttered between branches. Squirrels darted across the path. Normal stuff. After a while, the trail started to fade, and I had to pay more attention to where I was stepping. I didn't mind. I liked the feeling of being off the grid, away from the usual campsites where people left trash and noise behind. By the time I found a spot, the sun was starting to dip. It wasn't quite golden hour, but the light had that late afternoon glow. The spot was perfect. Flat ground, surrounded by trees on three sides, with a small clearing that let some light in. I dropped my pack, set up my tent, and gathered some wood for a fire, the usual routine. As the sun set, the woods came alive with that evening chorus. Crickets, distant owls, leaves rustling with small animals moving through the brush. It was peaceful. I sat by the fire, ate a simple meal, and watched the stars poke through the darkening sky. For a while, it was exactly what I'd hoped for. But then something felt off. It's hard to explain. Nothing big happened. The fire still crackled. The trees still swayed. But there was a shift, a tension in the air. The sounds of the woods seemed to thin out. The normal background noise, the crickets, the frogs. It all seemed to quiet, not all at once, but gradually, like a volume knob turning down. At first, I figured a predator was moving through. Maybe a coyote or a bobcat. Animals get quiet when something bigger's around. But this wasn't the usual quiet. This was the kind of silence that makes your skin feel too tight, like the air itself was watching. I told myself I was being stupid, that this is what happens when you spend too much time alone. Your mind plays tricks. I poked at the fire, added more wood, and tried to focus on the simple rhythm of the flames. But the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it got worse. That's when I noticed the sound. It was faint at first, a soft rustling, like something moving through the brush. Not fast, not trying to sneak, just moving. The sound was too steady for a small animal, too slow for a deer. It was deliberate. That's the word that came to mind. Deliberate, like it didn't care if it was heard. I sat still, listening. The fire popped, masking some of the noise, but between the cracks and hisses, the rustling continued. It was getting closer. I didn't grab my flashlight right away. I wanted my eyes to stay adjusted to the dark. The firelight only reached so far, casting a warm circle that faded into black. Beyond that edge, the woods seemed to press in thicker, heavier. Then it stepped into view. First, I thought it was a man. The shape was upright, tall, moving on two legs. But something was wrong. The head was too small. The arms, if they were arms, hung strange, like they were folded against its sides. And the way it walked was off. Not like a person, more like a bird. A slow, careful strut with knees bending backwards. The firelight caught a glint of something pale. Feathers? Fur? Couldn't tell. But it wasn't right. It stopped just beyond the edge of the firelight. For a long moment, we were both still. My mind raced, trying to slot it into something familiar. A large bird? A sick deer? Maybe some poor animal with mange or an injury that made it move weird. But none of those fit. It was tall, taller than a man. Slender, but not in a way that suggested weakness. Its outline was sharp, angular. The way it stood, balanced on two thin legs that bent the wrong way, was wrong in a way that made my gut twist. It didn't move closer. It just stood there, half in shadow, swaying slightly. Watching, I stayed frozen. My hand was near my pack, where my hatchet was tucked, but I didn't move for it. Something in me said not to, not yet. Then it made a sound. It wasn't a growl or a snarl. It wasn't even loud. It was a soft clicking noise, like two stones tapping together. Rhythmic, precise. Click, click. Pause. Click, click. Over and over. That sound broke something in me. The hair on my arms stood up. My breath came shallow. I knew then that this wasn't some wounded animal. This was something else. Something that didn't fit. The clicking stopped. It shifted its weight, one leg lifting high before stepping forward. Slow, careful. I felt pinned, like if I moved, it would close the distance in an instant. My heart pounded so loud it felt like it echoed in my ears. But it didn't charge. It didn't attack. Instead, it crouched. Its legs folded in that backwards way, bringing its torso lower. Its arms, I saw now that they were folded wings, twitched slightly, as if testing their movement. Up close, the texture of its body was clearer. Not smooth feathers, not fur, something in between. Matted, dirty, the way old taxidermy looks when it's been left to rot. Tilted its head. The firelight caught one of its eyes. A small, beady dot, black and wet. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Eventually, it stood again. Slowly, it turned, stepping back into the shadows. The clicking sound faded with it, swallowed by the woods. The usual night sounds didn't return right away. The silence held, thick and heavy. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the fire until dawn, hatchet in hand, eyes darting to every movement beyond the light. Every crack of a branch, every shift of a leaf made my pulse spike. But nothing came back. No clicking, no strange shapes, just the creeping return of normalcy as the sun rose. When the light was full, I packed up. I didn't bother with breakfast. I didn't care about retracing the trail. I just wanted out. The hike back felt longer than it should have. Every step felt watched. I didn't tell anyone about what I saw. What could I say? That I saw some weird birdman in the woods? They'd think I was nuts. But I know what I saw. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a monster from a campfire story. It was real, flesh and blood, out there. And it saw me too. Since then, I haven't gone solo camping. I tell people I just got busy. Life gets in the way, you know? But the truth is, I can't shake that feeling. That quiet, that deliberate click-click in the dark. Every now and then, I hear it in my head, and I wonder if it remembers me, because I sure as hell remember it. I've spent a lot of time outdoors, hunting, fishing, camping. Most of the time, it's nothing but quiet. Maybe a little boring if you're not used to it. People like to talk about the beauty of nature, but they don't mention the silence. How still and empty it can feel. You think you're alone out there, but the truth is you never are. Something's always watching, listening, waiting. You just don't notice until it's too late. It was late September when I went on that trip. Fall was setting in, but not cold enough yet for heavy snow. Perfect time for camping. The bugs were mostly gone. The leaves had started turning, and the woods had that crisp, sharp smell that comes with colder nights. I picked a spot I'd been to a few times before. Nothing official, no campground, just a clearing a couple miles off a logging road in northern Montana. Quiet, secluded, exactly what I wanted. I parked my truck on a dirt pull-off, slung my pack over my shoulder, and started hiking. The trail wasn't much of a trail, more like a faint path where game or hunters had passed through before. But I knew where I was going. You learn to read the land after a while. The way the trees thin out, the way the ground slopes, little markers you don't think about until you're out there. Took me about an hour to get to the clearing. Still had plenty of daylight left. I set up my tent under a tall stand of spruce, gathered some wood for a fire, and got everything ready before dark. That's the thing about camping alone, you stay ahead of the work. No one's coming to help if you slack off. By dusk, I had a good fire going. The light bounced off the trees, making them glow in that soft orange way that feels almost safe. I cooked up some simple food, nothing fancy, just what I could carry, and settled in for a quiet evening. The usual sounds filled the air. Wind moving through the trees, distant birds settling for the night, the occasional rustle of small animals in the brush. It was peaceful, until it wasn't. Started small, a noise I couldn't quite place. A low, steady crunch of something heavy moving through the underbrush. Not a squirrel, not a rabbit. Bigger, heavier. At first I thought it might be a deer, but the sound was wrong. Too deliberate, too slow. I stopped what I was doing, listening hard, holding my breath without realizing it. The noise came again, closer this time, the distinct sound of branches snapping under weight. And then another sound, a huff, low and heavy, like something exhaling in frustration. My gut twisted. I'd heard that sound before, on other trips, other places. A bear. My heart picked up. The fire suddenly felt way too small. I scanned the edge of the clearing, looking for movement. The light from the flames only reached so far, and beyond that was nothing but darkness. I reached slowly for the bear spray I kept clipped to my pack. My rifle was leaned up against a tree a few feet away, but I knew better than to make a sudden move for it. Bears aren't stupid. They're curious, cautious, but they can close ground faster than you'd ever expect. For a few minutes, the woods went still again. No crunching, no huffing, just the crackle of the fire and the pounding of my own heartbeat in my ears. Then it stepped into view. The bear was massive, a grizzly, no doubt. Broad shoulders, thick fur, long claws that caught the firelight. It moved with a kind of heavy grace, each step measured, its nose lifting to catch the scent of whatever had drawn it in. Probably the food smell, maybe even me. Either way, it was here now, and it wasn't in a hurry to leave. It stopped about 20 feet from where I sat, close enough to see the steam of its breath in the cool air, close enough that, if it wanted to charge, I wouldn't have much time to react. I stayed still. That's the thing most people don't get about bears. Running is the worst thing you can do. It triggers something in them. You run, they chase, and you won't outrun them. Doesn't matter how fast you think you are. Out here, you're on their turf. You play by their rules. The bear shifted its weight, sniffing the air again. Its eyes, small and dark, locked onto me. For a moment, we just stared at each other. I felt small, helpless. That's the truth of it. Out there, no cell service, no backup, you realize real quick how fragile you are. Took a step closer. I raised the bear spray slowly, trying not to make any sudden movements. My thumb hovered over the trigger. I didn't want to use it too soon. If the wind shifted wrong, I'd be the one blinded. Timing mattered. Another step. It was close enough now that I could see the scars in its fur, old wounds from fights, from other humans maybe. This wasn't some soft park bear used to tourists. This was a wild animal, king of its domain. It huffed again, loud this time, a warning. I didn't move. Then it did something I wasn't expecting. It turned slightly, circling the edge of the clearing, never taking its eyes off me. It was testing me, gauging what I'd do. I stayed crouched by the fire, bear spray ready, every muscle tense. It paused by my pack, sniffing at the fabric. My food was hung up in a tree a little ways off like you're supposed to, but maybe there was enough lingering scent to catch its interest. It nosed the pack, gave it a gentle push with its snout. For a horrible second, I thought it might tear into it, scatter my gear, make the rest of my trip a disaster. But it didn't. It sniffed once more, then turned back to me. Another step forward. Too close now. I fired the bear spray. A loud hiss filled the air as the orange cloud shot out, aimed right at its face. The bear reared back, shaking its head, coughing, snorting. Its eyes squeezed shut as the spray did its work. It wasn't magic. It didn't drop dead or run screaming, but it bought me time, precious seconds. It backed up, pawing at its face, grunting loud, the sound rumbling through the clearing. My heart slammed against my ribs. I grabbed my rifle, not to shoot, not yet, but to have it ready. The last thing I wanted was to escalate this into a kill situation, But if it came down to me or the bear, I knew what I had to do. The bear gave one final snort, shook its massive head, and turned away. It lumbered off, back into the dark, its heavy footsteps crunching through the brush. Slowly, the sounds faded. The tension didn't. I sat there for a long time, rifle in hand, watching the tree line. The fire had burned low, but I was too shaken to get up and feed it. Every sound felt sharper now. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a branch. My eyes kept darting to the dark, half expecting that massive shape to come barreling back. But it didn't. The rest of the night passed in uneasy silence. I didn't sleep, couldn't. I sat with my back to the tent, rifle across my lap, waiting for a sound that never came. The woods slowly returned to normal as dawn approached. The birds started their morning calls. The wind rustled through the trees with that soft sighing sound that usually calms me. Not this time. As soon as there was enough light, I packed up. Quick, efficient. I left nothing behind. My tracks were still fresh, but the bears were fresher. Huge prints in the soft earth, each one a reminder of how close it had come. I kept my rifle in hand as I hiked back, scanning the woods constantly. I knew the odds of a second encounter were low, but out there, you don't bet on odds. When I reached my truck, I felt the weight lift. Not all the way, not completely, but enough. The door slammed shut louder than usual. The engine roared to life, and with it came a strange mix of relief and shame. Relief to be safe. Shame at how scared I'd been. That's what stuck with me the most. People like to think they'll be brave in moments like that they'll stand tall, face danger head-on. But when you're 10 feet from a grizzly, when you can smell its breath and see the raw power in its muscles, all that bravado melts away. You're just a man, flesh and bone, soft, breakable. I didn't tell many people about that night. Not because I was embarrassed, though maybe part of me was, but because it's hard to explain. Most folks think a bear encounter is some thrilling adventure story, something exciting to brag about. But it wasn't exciting. It was raw, real, terrifying in a way that stays with you. Even now, years later, when I close my eyes, I can see it. The way it moved, the weight of its presence, the silent communication that passed between us in those moments. Could have killed me, easily, but it didn't. That's the part that gets me. Chose not to. I still go camping, not as much, and never without double-checking my gear. Bear spray, rifle, proper food storage. But more than that, I carry a different kind of respect now. Not fear, not quite, but close, and understanding. Out there, you're a guest, and you better act like it, because next time you might not get that same mercy. I had been planning this solo camping trip for a while. Nothing crazy, just 2 nights out in the backcountry of the Sierra Nevada. Far enough away to escape people, but not so far that I was flirting with disaster. I picked a spot about 7 miles in, off a lesser-used trail that ran along a ridgeline. No cell signal, no other people, just me, the trees, and the quiet. I wanted the quiet. Life had been too loud lately. The first day went exactly like I hoped. The air smelled like pine and dust. The sun felt warm on my face, and the weight of my pack was a welcome ache on my shoulders. I spent the morning hiking in, stopping now and then to drink water and breathe in the view. Once I reached the ridge, I found a small clearing about 30 yards off the trail and set up camp. Flat ground, a few trees for shade, and a gentle slope that would drain rainwater if the weather turned. Perfect. I pitched my tent, rolled out my sleeping pad, and gathered some wood for a small campfire later. After everything was in place, I spent the afternoon walking a little further down the ridge, following deer tracks and taking pictures of the rocky outcrops. It was quiet up there, peaceful in a way that only happens when you know there's no one else around. But quiet can play tricks on you, too. I started noticing it around dusk. It wasn't loud. In fact, it was the opposite, a shift in the way the forest sounded. Birds settled in early. The breeze seemed to stop moving through the trees. I remember thinking it was odd how still everything felt. I didn't like it. Stillness isn't normal in the woods. Not for long. Something always rustles, always chirps or cracks a twig underfoot. That kind of quiet usually means there's a bigger predator nearby. I've camped enough to know that mountain lions are out there. You rarely see them. They're ghosts, moving through the trees without a sound. But when they're around, everything else shuts up. The woods hold their breath. Still, I told myself not to get jumpy. I hadn't seen anything. Maybe it was just the time of year. Maybe it was just my imagination. I cooked my dinner in my little campfire ring. Nothing fancy, just dehydrated noodles and a handful of jerky. I kept my head on a swivel, though. Every time I looked away from the dark tree line, I'd find myself glancing back, like my gut wouldn't let me forget it was there. By the time the light was almost gone, I doused my fire and crawled into my tent. The air had cooled, and the fabric walls felt paper-thin in that dark. I lay on my back, staring up through the mesh, watching the last light fade out. For a while, everything was fine. My breathing slowed, the weight of the hike settled into my bones, and I started to drift. Then I heard it, a soft crunch, footsteps, slow and deliberate. It wasn't the shuffle of a squirrel or the scatter of a rabbit. This was heavier, careful, the kind of movement that belongs to something that knows it's being quiet on purpose. Mountain lion. I stayed perfectly still. My sleeping bag suddenly felt like a trap. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears, louder than the sound outside. Another crunch, closer, maybe 15 yards from the tent now. I had bear spray clipped to my pack outside the tent. Smart place for it, right? I cursed myself quietly. What good would it do me out there? I had a knife, but it was barely a pocket knife. A tool for cutting rope or slicing an apple, not fighting off a mountain lion. Another step, 10 yards. I strained my ears. Mountain lions don't growl like in the movies. They stay silent until they strike. But I knew it was there. The weight of it, the precision in its steps. It was circling, watching. I thought about making noise, trying to scare it off, but something told me to stay quiet. No sudden moves, no panicked shouting. Predators key off weakness. Panic is weakness. Minutes passed like hours. The steps would come and go, circling wider, then closing in. I couldn't see it through the tent walls, but I could feel it out there. Then silence. I don't know how long it lasted. Long enough that my breathing calmed. Long enough for me to start thinking maybe it had moved on. My body hurt from staying so tense, every muscle locked. And then sudden, a soft brush against the side of the tent. Not a paw, not claws, just the lightest contact. Like something leaned in, curious. My breath stopped. My mouth went dry. The nylon dipped inward just slightly where it touched, barely noticeable in the dark. Then it was gone. No sound, no movement, just the night again. I lay there frozen. That was it. That was the test. It knew I was in there. It had smelled me, maybe seen me, and now it was deciding what to do. Sleep wasn't going to happen that night. I stayed awake, straining to hear every sound outside. At some point, the forest slowly started to breathe again. A night bird called. A breeze picked up, whispering through the pines. But I didn't trust it. Morning couldn't come fast enough. When the light finally crept back into the tent, I waited a little longer before unzipping the door. My hand was shaking. I stepped out slowly, scanning the clearing. Nothing. No movement. But when I looked down, I saw the prints. Clear as day. Large paw prints, spaced in a slow, deliberate circle around my tent. Deep impressions in the pine needles and dirt. It had been right there, watching me all night. I packed up fast. No breakfast. No coffee. I kept my bear spray in my hand as I stuffed my gear back into the pack. Every crack of a branch, every shadow between the trees made my stomach tighten. I kept expecting to see those golden eyes staring back at me from the brush. The hike out felt twice as long as the hike in. I didn't stop. I didn't take water breaks. I just walked, fast and focused, scanning ahead and behind me with every few steps. The woods felt less like a place to enjoy and more like something trying to close in. Only when I was back in my car, doors locked, did I let myself breathe normally again. I thought about that night a lot in the weeks after. How quiet it was, how close it got. I've been lucky. Mountain lions rarely attack people, but rarely doesn't mean never. It had come close enough to brush against my tent. That wasn't just passing through. That was curious. That was hungry. Looking back, I think the only reason it didn't attack was because I didn't give it an opening. I stayed calm. I didn't bolt. And maybe it decided I wasn't worth the risk. But it had made its point. Out there, in its territory, I was just another animal. Not special. Not safe. Just meat in a thin nylon bag. I still go camping. Still love the quiet of the woods. But now, when the birds stop singing, when the breeze holds its breath, I listen closer. I stay ready, because out there, you're never really alone. I've been camping alone for most of my adult life. There's something about being far away from people that helps clear my head. It's not that I dislike people. I just need to get away sometimes. I've done solo trips in forests, mountains, and deserts, always careful, always prepared. But there's one trip I've never been able to forget. It wasn't the weather or an accident or some dramatic event. It was something small, subtle at first, but it still keeps me up at night. This happened in the fall a few years back. The days were getting shorter, the air cooler, but it wasn't winter yet. I had taken a week off work, packed my gear, and drove up to a remote state forest that bordered a large stretch of protected land. No towns nearby, no campgrounds. Just old logging roads and trails that faded into nothing. Exactly what I was looking for. I parked my truck off an old dirt road, where the trees closed in thick. My pack was heavy with supplies, tent, sleeping bag, food, water filter, stove, the usual gear. The hike to where I planned to camp was about 6 miles in. The trail was narrow and overgrown in places, winding through dense woods and skirting around steep hills. Hardly anyone went out that far. The first few hours were uneventful. The forest was quiet, just the sounds of wind in the trees, birds calling, the crunch of leaves under my boots. I took my time, enjoying the isolation. I reached a small clearing by late afternoon. It was a good spot, flat ground, a small stream nearby, plenty of deadfall for firewood. The forest around it was dense, the trees tall and close together. You couldn't see more than 50 feet in any direction before the woods swallowed everything. I set up camp, tent pitched, sleeping bag unrolled, food hung up out of reach of animals. I gathered firewood, stacked it neatly, and built a small fire ring from stones. As the sun dropped lower, the woods got colder, shadows stretching long. I got the fire going, cooked a simple meal, and sat back against a log, watching the flames dance. Everything felt normal, but not long after sunset, I started to notice the silence. Usually, forests are noisy at night. Frogs, crickets, owls, small animals rustling through the brush. But here there was nothing. No frogs by the stream, no insects chirping, just the wind moving through the high branches. It wasn't loud, but it was constant. I chalked it up to the cold. Maybe it was too chilly for the usual night sounds. Still, it made me uneasy. I banked the fire, crawled into my tent, and zipped up my sleeping bag. The air smelled like wood smoke and damp earth. I lay there, staring up at the thin fabric of the tent, listening to the wind. I must have drifted off at some point, because the next thing I remember is waking up suddenly. No sound had woken me. It was more like my body was telling me to be awake. The kind of feeling where something's off, but you don't know why yet. The forest was still dead silent. The wind had stopped. No leaves rustling, no branches creaking. Just an eerie stillness pressing in from all sides. Then I heard it. A soft crunch, like a footstep on dry leaves. Not close, but not far either. Off to my left, somewhere beyond the edge of the clearing. I held my breath, straining to listen. Another step. Same soft crunch. It wasn't fast. Slow, deliberate, like something was walking carefully. I stayed perfectly still in my sleeping bag, listening. For a moment, I tried to tell myself it was just a deer. Maybe a bear, though bears move differently. Heavier, less careful. This was precise. The steps continued, moving slowly, circling the edge of my camp. I couldn't see anything through the tent walls, but I could picture it in my mind. something moving just beyond the light of my fire, watching, staying out of sight. I kept listening, heart pounding. Then the steps stopped. The silence came back, heavier now. I lay there, every muscle tense, ears straining. After what felt like hours, I finally dozed off again, though it wasn't restful. My dreams were shallow, filled with shapes moving through trees. Morning came gray and cold. The fire had burned down to ash. The forest seemed normal again. Birds singing, squirrels chattering. The night felt like a bad dream. But when I stepped out of my tent, I noticed something. About 30 feet away, near the edge of the clearing, the ground was disturbed. Dry leaves had been pushed aside, the soil beneath scuffed up. I walked over slowly, crouched down. There were marks. Not clear footprints, but impressions, as if something heavy had stood there. The pattern was strange, too. Not a paw print, not a boot. Just a vague, wide depression with edges that didn't make sense. It looked like fingers. Not hands, but long, thin digits had pressed into the dirt. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold air. I spent the day on edge, keeping busy, gathering more firewood, checking my gear. I didn't go far from camp. The forest didn't feel welcoming anymore. It felt like it was holding its breath. That night, I built the fire bigger, kept it going longer. I didn't want darkness creeping in around me, but eventually, the firewood ran low, and I had to retreat to my tent. Again, I lay awake, listening. The wind returned, moving through the trees. The normal forest sounds had gone quiet again. And then, just like before, I heard it. Soft crunches, footsteps. This time, it was closer. The steps circled my camp, slow and steady. I could hear them moving from one side of the clearing to the other. At one point, they paused directly behind my tent. The thin nylon fabric did nothing to hide me. I felt exposed, vulnerable. Every instinct told me not to move, not to make a sound. Then came a different sound. A soft, rhythmic tapping. Took me a second to realize it was fingers. Something was tapping gently on the top of my tent. Not claws scraping, not a branch brushing in the wind. Fingers, tapping, tap, tap, tap. 3 slow taps, then silence. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Eventually, the footsteps resumed, moving away, fading into the forest. I didn't sleep after that. At first light, I packed up camp. I didn't eat, didn't make coffee. I just packed everything as fast as I could and started hiking back. The woods felt tighter, more closed in. Every sound made me jump. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see something following me. But the forest stayed quiet. When I reached my truck, the sense of relief was overwhelming. I tossed my gear in the bed, slammed the tailgate shut, and climbed in. As I started the engine, I glanced once more toward the tree line. That's when I saw it. Not a clear view, just a glimpse. A figure standing partially hidden behind a tree. Tall, too tall to be a person. Thin, arms longer than they should be. The skin was pale, almost blending with the gray bark. It didn't move, just watched. I didn't stay to get a better look. The drive out felt endless. The dirt road was rough, my tires crunching over gravel and roots. Only when I hit pavement did I start to feel safe again. Back home, I didn't tell anyone right away. What could I say? That I saw a thing in the woods? That something circled my camp at night and tapped on my tent? Eventually, I started looking up animal behaviors, trying to find a logical explanation. Bears, coyotes, big cats. None of it matched. No known animal moves like that. Taps on tents, stands upright, and watches from the trees. I read about people seeing things in the woods, misidentified animals, shadows playing tricks, even people with mental health episodes. I considered all of it. But what I saw wasn't a shadow. It wasn't my imagination. I was well rested the first night, alert the second. I know the difference between something in my head and something standing 30 feet away. What stuck with me most was how careful it was. Not aggressive, not charging into camp. It stayed just out of reach, stayed hidden, watching, moving with quiet purpose. That's what made it so unnerving. It wasn't wild and chaotic. It was patient. I never went back to that forest. I still camp, but never alone in places that remote. There are things out there that don't fit, that don't belong to the neat categories we like to believe. Not ghosts, not monsters, just something else, something real. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the woods, even in safer places, I catch myself listening for soft footsteps, for the sound of fingers tapping where they shouldn't, because now I know better. I've always been the kind of person who found peace in the woods. The solitude, the quiet, the slow rhythm of nature. Camping alone was how I recharged, how I escaped the mess of daily life. For years, I had camped in different forests, from national parks to remote wilderness areas. I was careful, prepared, and respectful of the wild. I never expected the kind of experience I had on that trip. It started like any other solo camping trip. I chose a remote section of a large state forest, far from towns and trails, deep enough that I wouldn't see many people for days. The forest was dense, with tall pines and hardwoods towering above. The ground was thick with needles and leaves, soft and silent to walk on. The smell of pine and damp earth filled the air, and the only sounds were the occasional bird calls and the wind moving through the branches. I arrived in the late afternoon, carrying a heavy backpack with my tent, sleeping bag, food, and cooking gear. The hike in was long and challenging. The trail was narrow and winding, crossing over small streams and climbing steep hills. The sun filtered weakly through the canopy, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow. When I reached a small clearing next to a creek, I knew I had found my spot. It was peaceful and quiet, surrounded by trees but open enough to see the sky. The creek water was clear and cold, running over smooth rocks. I set up camp carefully, pitching my tent on a flat patch of ground covered in soft moss. I built a fire ring from stones and collected dry wood for the night. As the sun began to set, I made a small fire, cooked my meal over the flames, and sat quietly, watching the orange glow flicker and listening to the forest settle into darkness. The night was cool but not cold. The stars were bright and countless, spread across the sky like pinpricks of light. The sounds of the forest changed. Frogs croaking by the creek, the rustle of small animals moving in the underbrush, the occasional snap of a twig. It was the kind of night that felt safe, even sacred. I went to sleep feeling calm. I woke early the next morning before sunrise. The air was crisp and fresh, with a light mist rising off the creek. I stepped out of my tent and stretched, listening to the quiet. The forest was waking up slowly. Birds began their morning songs, and the light turned soft gold through the trees. As I packed up my things, I noticed some tracks near the edge of the clearing, in the soft dirt near the creek. They looked like paw prints, but larger than any dog I'd seen. I followed them carefully, curious. The prints were spaced oddly. Some looked like normal dog paw prints, but others were elongated, more like footprints from a human. The depth varied too, as if the creature had sometimes been on all fours and sometimes upright. I shook off the strange feeling and continued my hike. I wanted to explore a bit before leaving the area. The forest here was dense and tangled, full of fallen logs, thick brush, and rocky outcrops. I moved quietly, scanning the surroundings. Then I saw it. At first, I thought it was a large dog standing on its hind legs, near the base of a tree. I stopped dead in my tracks, eyes wide. The figure was roughly the size of a large German shepherd or a wolf dog, but it was upright, standing completely on two legs. Its posture was stiff and awkward, not natural at all. The front legs hung loosely at its sides, and the shoulders were hunched forward. Its head was tilted slightly, watching me with sharp, alert eyes. The coat was thick and dark, a mix of black and brown fur, matted and dirty in places. It looked like it hadn't groomed itself for a long time. The creature's ears were pricked up, and its gaze was intense and unblinking. I didn't move. I just stared, trying to process what I was seeing. The figure shifted slightly, swaying unsteadily on its hind legs, as if struggling to maintain balance. Its movements were slow and deliberate, not the quick, fluid motions of a healthy animal. There was something painfully wrong about it. After a few moments, it dropped down to all fours and disappeared silently into the trees. The whole encounter lasted less than a minute, but it felt much longer. My heart was pounding. I felt a surge of adrenaline and a deep unease that I couldn't explain. Was it an injured animal? Some kind of neurological disorder? I had heard of animals with spinal injuries standing or walking on hind legs, but never like this, never in the wild and so clearly visible. I stayed alert the rest of the day, looking for signs, tracks, anything. I found nothing else unusual. The forest seemed normal, peaceful again. That night, though, sleep was impossible. I lay in my tent. The image of the creature burned into my mind. Every sound outside, twigs snapping, leaves rustling, made me tense up. Suddenly, just past midnight, I heard movement near the edge of my camp. Heavy, slow steps crunching over dry leaves. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent silently. The beam of light cut through the darkness and landed on the figure. It was there again, the dog standing on two legs near the firewood pile. The light caught the sharp gleam of its eyes, its matted fur, and the unnatural posture. It didn't growl or bark. It didn't move closer, just stood there watching, tense and cautious. I could see scars and patches of missing fur on its body, and the way its muscles twitched under the skin told me it was in pain. I held my breath, heart racing, unsure what to do. I knew any sudden movement could provoke it, but staying still felt just as dangerous. After what felt like an eternity, it slowly lowered itself to all fours and slipped back into the woods. I watched until the trees swallowed it whole. The next morning, I packed up quickly, still shaken. I didn't want to stay another night. On the hike out, I looked again for tracks or signs, but found none that matched those strange footprints. Back home, I contacted a wildlife expert, sending the photos I'd managed to take. The expert told me what I suspected. The animal was likely suffering from a severe spinal injury or neurological disorder. Such injuries can cause animals to stand or walk on hind legs, but they're rare, and animals usually hide themselves when they're in pain or confused. The expert warned that injured animals could be unpredictable and sometimes dangerous. Their pain and fear could make them aggressive or cause unusual behavior. That explained the fear I felt. Not because it was something supernatural or monstrous, but because it was a wild creature in pain, struggling to survive in a world where it clearly didn't belong anymore. I still camp, but I'm more cautious now. I watch the woods carefully, respect every shadow and sound, and I remember that strange night when I saw a dog standing on two legs in the wild. A reminder that sometimes nature's reality is far stranger and more unsettling than any story. I had always loved camping alone. The quiet, the fresh air, the crackling of a campfire under a star-studded sky. It was my way of escaping the noise and stress of everyday life. Over the years, I had become comfortable in the woods, learning to read the sounds and signs of nature, and always respecting its power. I thought I knew what to expect, but that trip changed everything. I chose a spot deep in a national forest that I hadn't explored before. It was about a 4-hour drive from home, the kind of place where few people came, with thick woods stretching for miles and little cell signal. The kind of place where the only light at night comes from the moon and stars, and the only sounds are animals and the wind through the trees. The hike in was long and challenging. I carried a heavy pack with my tent, food, water, and gear. The trail wound through dense forest, the ground uneven and covered in leaves and roots. Every step took me farther from the busy world I knew. After several hours, I found a small clearing near a creek. The ground was soft, dotted with wildflowers and surrounded by towering pines. The creek's water was clear and cold, trickling over smooth stones. I set up camp there, feeling the quiet settle around me. It was peaceful in a way that felt ancient, like the forest had been waiting silently for centuries. I built a small fire and cooked a simple meal. As the sun dipped behind the trees, the temperature dropped, and the woods took on a deep blue shade. The forest sounds grew louder, the chirping of crickets, the rustling of small animals in the underbrush, the occasional call of a distant bird. That night, I lay in my sleeping bag inside the tent, listening. The forest was alive but calm. I heard the gentle rush of the creek and the soft flutter of leaves in the breeze. Nothing unusual, I drifted off to sleep. The next day, I woke early. The sky was pale gray, filtered through a canopy of leaves. I stepped outside and felt the cool air on my face. The forest was waking up. Birds called to one another, and squirrels darted through the trees. I decided to explore the area around the creek. As I walked, I saw fresh deer tracks in the mud, clear impressions of hooves pressed deeply into the soft earth. The prints were large, maybe from a buck, but something struck me as odd. The spacing between the tracks was uneven, as if the deer had sometimes walked normally on all fours and other times something else was going on. I followed the trail quietly, careful not to disturb anything. The forest was dense here, the trees close together, their trunks tall and straight. Light filtered through in narrow beams, casting long shadows. Suddenly, I caught a movement to my left, just beyond a fallen log. I froze and looked carefully. There it was, a deer, but not like any I had ever seen before. It stood on its hind legs. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks. Maybe it was reaching up to eat leaves from a branch, balancing momentarily. But it wasn't just a quick movement. The deer stayed upright for several seconds, perfectly still, its body vertical like a person standing. Its legs looked too long for a normal deer when it was in this position. The muscles were tense, and it seemed awkward, as if it was struggling to keep balance. The front legs hung loosely, but every now and then, it would shift its weight slightly, making the stance look almost deliberate. The head was low, the eyes dark and wide, reflecting the dim forest light. It watched me with an intensity that was unsettling. It wasn't afraid. It wasn't running. It just stood there, observing. I slowly raised my camera and snapped a few pictures, careful not to make sudden moves. The deer finally dropped back onto all fours and moved deeper into the forest, disappearing among the trees. My heart was pounding. I tried to reason it out. Maybe the deer was injured, or maybe it had a neurological condition causing it to stand that way. I had heard of animals suffering from diseases that altered their behavior. Chronic wasting disease, for example, can cause deer to act strangely. I spent the rest of the day feeling uneasy but tried to stay calm. I noted the odd tracks again. Sometimes they looked like normal hoof prints, sometimes more like elongated footprints. The more I thought about it, the less it made sense. That night, as I lay in my tent, the forest felt different. The sounds were the same, but the atmosphere was heavier, almost watchful. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was nearby, something watching me back. I heard movement again, outside the tent, faint but steady. Not footsteps, but something heavier pacing slowly. The crackle of twigs and leaves. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent quietly. In the pale moonlight, I saw it again, the deer standing on two legs, a few yards from my campfire site. Its posture was unnatural and stiff. The front legs hung awkwardly at its sides, and the neck stretched forward, as if it was trying to get a better look at me. The firelight reflected in its eyes, making them shine like dark orbs. I kept still, watching. The deer's breathing was heavy and uneven. It didn't move closer, but didn't back away either. Something about it was deeply wrong. I noticed patches of fur missing around its neck and shoulders. The skin was scarred in places. The muscles twitched under the damaged hide. It looked like the animal was suffering, but somehow forced itself into this strange posture. It stayed like that for what felt like an hour. Then, slowly, it lowered itself back onto all fours and disappeared into the darkness of the trees. I didn't sleep much after that. My mind was racing, trying to understand what I'd seen. I thought about the possibility of a disease causing neurological damage or deformity. Maybe the deer's spine was injured or malformed, forcing it to balance on its hind legs. Maybe it was a rare mutation. Whatever it was still an animal struggling to survive. The next morning, I packed up quickly, eager to leave. On the way out, I looked for more tracks but found none that matched the odd ones from before. The forest seemed to swallow the mystery whole. Back home, I sent the pictures to a wildlife biologist I knew. He told me the images showed an extremely rare case of an animal suffering from a severe spinal injury or a neurological disorder causing it to stand upright unnaturally. He warned me to be careful around such animals. They could be unpredictable and dangerous because of their pain and confusion. That explained the fear I felt. It wasn't a myth or some strange creature. It was nature's harsh reality, an animal suffering, surviving in a way it shouldn't have to. The experience stayed with me. I thought about how fragile the line is between normal and strange in the wild, how animals adapt or suffer, and how sometimes what looks like something unreal is just the harsh truth of life in nature. I still go camping, but I keep my distance now. I watch carefully, respect every sound and shadow. And I remember that night when the forest showed me something I never expected. A deer standing on two legs, struggling to be itself in a world that didn't make sense for it anymore. I never imagined that a camping trip, something I had done many times before, would turn into one of the most unsettling experiences of my life. It wasn't the usual fears. No stories about ghosts or monsters. No dramatic legends whispered around a fire. This was something different, something real, something I still struggle to explain. I had planned this trip for months, a solo weekend away from the city, deep into the forest. I wanted to disconnect from everything, work, phones, people, and just be alone with nature. I chose a remote spot in a national forest known for its wildlife, tall trees, and quiet trails. I knew the area well, having camped there before, but this time I wanted to go farther in, away from any other campers or hikers. The hike was tough but rewarding. The trail twisted and turned through dense woods, with the smell of pine and damp earth all around me. The sun was shining bright, filtering through the leaves, and the only sounds were my boots crunching on the dry leaves and the distant calls of birds. I felt calm and ready for a weekend of solitude. I picked a clearing near a small creek to set up camp. The ground was soft, covered with a thick layer of fallen pine needles, and the creek babbled quietly nearby. Felt like the perfect place. I set up my tent carefully, gathered firewood, and built a small fire pit surrounded by stones I found nearby. The evening was peaceful. I cooked my dinner on a portable stove, ate slowly while watching the fire crackle and pop, and let the quietness settle in. As the sky darkened, stars began to peek through the branches above. The forest around me grew still, except for the occasional rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush. I lay down in my sleeping bag, but I wasn't tired yet. The night was calm, almost too calm. I listened carefully. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the faint sound of footsteps, light, quick, and soft, moving through the woods. It didn't sound like a human. It was lighter, almost like the sound of hooves, but not quite. I thought maybe it was a deer or some other animal. Still, the sound didn't stop. It grew closer, then farther away, then closer again. At times, it sounded like something was circling the campsite. That first night, I didn't see anything. I told myself it was just my imagination and the usual noises of the forest. But something felt off. The quietness was too intense, and the footsteps didn't match any animal I had heard before. The next day, I decided to explore deeper into the forest. The trail became less clear, and the trees grew closer together. I moved slowly, watching for signs of wildlife. I saw tracks, hoof prints in the mud, but they looked strange. Larger than normal deer prints and with an odd shape, almost like they had been twisted or flattened in places. I snapped pictures with my phone and took notes, curious but uneasy. I also noticed something else. The deer I spotted were skittish, watching me with sharp, wary eyes before disappearing quickly into the trees. The usual peaceful grazing was missing. The forest felt tense, like it was holding its breath. Back at camp, the unease grew stronger. At night, the footsteps returned, but this time they were accompanied by a low, guttural sound I couldn't place. It wasn't an animal growl, but it wasn't a human noise either. It was somewhere between a grunt and a hiss. I stayed awake, flashlight in hand, scanning the dark woods. I thought I saw movement, shadows shifting just beyond the tree line. A tall, thin figure standing upright, but with something strange about it. I blinked, and it was gone. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. By the third day, I wasn't sure what to believe anymore. The forest no longer felt like a safe place. I packed up in the early morning, wanting to leave before nightfall. As I walked the trail back to the car, I kept hearing those footsteps behind me. Soft, deliberate, keeping pace just beyond my sight. I tried to stay calm, but my heart was pounding, and every crack of a twig made me jump. Then I saw it. Standing just at the edge of the clearing, barely visible in the morning fog, was a deer, or something that looked like a deer. Its body was too large, too lanky, and the way it stood was unnatural. Its legs were longer than any deer's I'd ever seen, almost human-like in shape. The head was narrow, but the eyes were too big and dark, reflecting the weak sunlight like glass. Its neck moved slowly, almost as if it was watching me, studying me. I froze. It didn't run away. It didn't make a sound. It just stayed still, unmoving, locked in place. Then it shifted, in a way that no deer should be able to. It straightened up a little, standing more upright on its hind legs, which were too long and bent at strange angles. Its front legs twitched as if trying to balance, and its head tilted at an impossible angle. The eyes, huge, black, unreadable, locked onto mine. I don't remember moving. My body acted on its own, turning and running down the trail as fast as I could. The sound of hooves pounding behind me grew louder, closer. The animal was following. Branches whipped past me, and I stumbled several times, but I kept going. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I didn't dare stop. Behind me, the sounds of something running on two legs, heavy, powerful, and unnatural, were chasing me through the forest. I burst out of the trees and saw my car. I threw my pack in the back seat, slammed the door, and started the engine with shaking hands. As I drove away, I kept looking in the rearview mirror. The clearing grew smaller, and the strange creature never appeared again. But the image stayed burned in my mind. The lanky legs, the glassy eyes, the unnatural movements. Later, I searched for any explanations. I found reports of skinwalkers, not the supernatural kind from stories, but descriptions from people who saw animals that looked like they were trying to mimic humans or were hybrids. Animals with strange, human-like traits and movements, probably deformed or affected by disease, genetics, or environmental factors. Some experts suggested these could be cases of animals suffering from rare conditions like chronic wasting disease, which affects deer and elk and can cause strange behavior and appearance. Whatever it was real, and it was terrifying. I never camped alone again. I stick to well-traveled spots now and always keep my phone and bear spray close. That experience changed how I see the forest. Not as a peaceful escape, but as a place full of secrets, where nature can sometimes be more strange and frightening than we imagine. The skinwalker deer wasn't a myth or a ghost. It was something that walked the line between animal and something else, something wrong in nature's balance. And for a moment, it had been close enough to watch me. I never thought a camping trip could turn into something I would never forget, something that still makes my skin crawl years later. I wasn't looking for trouble. I wasn't trying to find danger. I just wanted a quiet weekend away in the woods, something simple and peaceful. The plan was straightforward. I chose a remote forest area in the mountains, far from the usual crowded campgrounds. I wanted to hike in, set up camp, and spend a couple of nights alone. No distractions, no noise from cars or people. Just me, nature, and the sound of the wind through the trees. I arrived early in the afternoon, carrying my pack that was heavy but manageable. The trail was narrow and steep in some parts, lined with pine trees that towered over me like silent guardians. The air smelled fresh, a mix of damp earth, pine needles, and moss. I walked steadily, the crunch of my boots against the dry leaves and twigs echoing in the quiet. After about 3 miles, I found a clearing beside a small creek. The ground was flat, covered in soft pine needles. It was the perfect spot. I pitched my tent carefully, hammering stakes deep into the ground so the wind wouldn't blow it away at night. Then I gathered firewood, mostly dry sticks and dead branches from the ground, and built a modest fire pit, arranging stones around it. The sun was dipping low, and the forest began to change. Shadows stretched long between the trees. Birds were quiet now, and an eerie stillness took over. It felt like the forest was holding its breath. I cooked a simple meal on my portable stove and ate quickly, my eyes constantly scanning the tree line. As darkness fell, I built up the fire, the flames crackling and popping, sending sparks into the air. I sat close to the warmth, listening to the forest sounds, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl, the gurgle of the creek. I went to bed early, but sleep did not come easily. I kept hearing strange noises, deep growls, branches snapping far off, the sound of something heavy moving through the underbrush. At first, I told myself it was just a deer or maybe a bear. I'd read plenty about wildlife in the area. Still, the noises didn't feel normal. They were too low, too deliberate, like an animal watching me. I stayed awake for a long time, flashlight in hand, eyes darting around the dark. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I fell into a restless sleep. The next day was uneventful during daylight. I hiked along the creek, taking notes on plants and animals, trying to push the night's unease out of my mind. But by late afternoon, the strange sounds returned. This time, they were closer. A guttural growl came from just beyond the tree line. I froze, heart pounding. I remembered my father telling me stories when I was a kid. Stories about wolves in the mountains, about strange animals that sometimes stalked the forests at night. I laughed at myself for thinking about those old tales. But deep down, I felt a cold fear. That night, the sounds were worse. More growling, branches breaking, heavy footsteps circling my campsite. I could hear breathing, slow and deep, just outside the edge of the firelight. I clutched my knife and tried to stay calm. Suddenly, the fire flickered and nearly went out. The wind had picked up, and the dark shapes beyond the light seemed to move closer. My heart felt like it would burst. I didn't want to look, but I had to know what was there. I pointed the flashlight toward the edge of the clearing, and for a brief moment, I saw it. A large figure with a hunched back, covered in dark fur, glowing eyes reflecting the light. It was huge, much bigger than any bear I had ever seen. It didn't growl again. It just stared. The silence was worse than the noise. I grabbed my pack and started packing quickly. I had to get out. My mind raced. The fire was dying, and I had no way to defend myself properly. I had no radio, no phone signal. I was completely alone. Then I heard it move. Fast, powerful steps crashing through the underbrush, heading toward me. I stuffed my gear into my pack and threw everything into the tent. My hands shook as I zipped it up. I grabbed my flashlight and knife and started walking away from the fire and the clearing, toward the trailhead. The forest seemed to close in around me. Every step was heavy, like the trees themselves were watching. The growling started again, this time all around me. I felt surrounded, trapped in a nightmare. I tried to keep calm, moving faster, but the footsteps behind me got louder. Something was following. Suddenly, a loud crack to my left made me jump. A massive shape burst through the trees, blocking my path. I could see its eyes now, fierce and bright, its teeth bared in a snarl. I ran. My legs burned, my lungs gasped for air, but I didn't look back. The sounds of heavy footsteps chased me through the forest, crashing branches and snapping twigs right behind. I kept running until I reached a rocky ridge and scrambled up it, using every ounce of strength. The forest below was dark and alive with noise, but I held my ground at the top, panting and terrified. For a long time, I just watched and waited, the creature's growls fading as it lost interest and moved back into the woods. When dawn finally broke, I took a moment to catch my breath and collect myself. I packed the last of my things and started the long hike back to my car. The morning was quiet, almost peaceful, but I didn't feel safe. On the drive home, I researched everything I could about local wildlife. Wolves? Bears? Mountain lions? Nothing explained what I had seen. Then I found stories from other hikers about strange large animals spotted in the area. Creatures that didn't quite fit into any known category. Big, powerful, covered in thick fur, with almost human-like intelligence in their eyes. The more I read, the more I realized I wasn't dealing with a normal animal. Whatever had followed me wasn't just hunting for food. It was watching, studying, and maybe even protecting its territory with an intelligence beyond a typical predator. I never returned to that campsite. I warned friends and hikers to be careful in those woods. The creature I saw might not be a myth, but it's certainly not something to be taken lightly. That trip changed how I think about wilderness. The forest is wild in more ways than one. It's not just animals and plants. Sometimes, it hides things that make you question what you know about nature and survival. The fear I felt wasn't just from the dark or the unknown. It was from knowing there's something out there bigger, stronger, and smarter than you, and you're just a visitor in its world. The experience has stayed with me, a reminder that sometimes nature's greatest dangers aren't just the elements or the weather, but the creatures that walk the shadows, silent and unseen, waiting for you to step into their domain. I had been looking forward to this camping trip for weeks. After months of work stress, long days, and the noise of the city, I needed to get away and be alone in the woods. I wanted nothing but silence, fresh air, and the sound of nature. I planned a solo trip to a remote forest reserve, far from any roads or towns. The idea was simple: pitch a tent, live off the land for a few days, and just disconnect. I packed my gear carefully: a sturdy tent, sleeping bag, enough food and water for 5 days, a map, compass, a first aid kit, and a small pocket knife. I also brought a flashlight and extra batteries, though I hoped to use it as little as possible. I drove as far as the forest road would allow, then hiked in about 5 miles until I found a small clearing near a stream. It was perfect: flat ground, surrounded by tall pine trees, with the stream close enough for water but far enough to avoid flooding. The first day was peaceful. I set up my tent, gathered firewood, and cooked some dehydrated stew over my portable stove. The air smelled fresh and piney. Birds called in the distance, and squirrels scurried up trees. At night, the sky was clear, and the stars seemed brighter than I had ever seen. I fell asleep to the sound of the running stream and the rustling of leaves. On the second day, I went for a long hike. The forest was dense, with narrow paths that twisted around giant tree trunks and thick underbrush. I spotted some deer tracks and a few birds I couldn't identify. The air was cooler deeper in the woods, and I felt small and alone, but not in a bad way. I enjoyed the solitude. That night, I built a bigger fire. The warmth felt good against the chill, and I sat by the flames until late, watching sparks float upward into the dark. I thought about how few people came here, how easy it was to disappear for a while. I slept well again. The third day started off calm, but got strange by afternoon. I had been exploring a new trail when I noticed something odd. A faint smell, something like burning plastic mixed with wet dirt. It was faint but unusual. I followed the scent, a little curious but cautious. It led me to a narrow ravine where the ground looked disturbed. Small patches of burnt grass, some blackened sticks. It looked like someone had started a fire here but abandoned it. I didn't think much of it and kept going. But later, as I returned to my campsite, I realized something else was wrong. My backpack, which I had left zipped and locked, was unzipped slightly. Nothing seemed missing, but the zipper was halfway down, as if someone had opened it and closed it again carelessly. I checked my food supplies and gear, all there. I must have left it that way, I thought, trying not to worry. Still, a little unease settled in. That night, I double-checked my tent zippers and locked the pockets on my pack. I put my knife close by and kept the flashlight within reach. On the fourth day, I woke early. The forest was still and quiet, the mist hanging low among the trees. I decided to hike toward the stream, hoping to find better spots for fishing and maybe catch some fresh food. I packed some snacks, my fishing gear, and set off. About an hour into my hike, I saw something unusual near the water's edge. A small campfire circle, surrounded by stones, with half-burned logs. It wasn't mine. I had never seen it before. The fire was cold but recent. There were also footprints around it, heavy boot prints, too big for any animal. They led into the forest in one direction. My heart beat faster. Who else was here? I was deep enough in the woods that people rarely came. This wasn't a popular campsite, not marked on any maps. I scanned the area carefully. No sign of tents or gear, just the fire pit and footprints. I thought about heading back to my camp, but curiosity made me follow the footprints a little. They went downhill along the stream, disappearing into thicker brush. After 10 minutes, I turned back, not wanting to get lost. Back at camp, I tried to shake off the feeling of being watched. I told myself it was probably hunters or another camper who left quickly. But as the afternoon passed, I noticed more small signs. Broken branches along my path, fresh footprints around my tent, and even some scattered bits of paper that weren't mine. I started making plans to leave early the next morning. I packed most of my gear before dark and kept my fire small. When I went to bed, I put my phone and knife by my side and tried to stay awake for a while, listening for any sounds. The night was the worst. Around midnight, I heard noises outside my tent. Footsteps crunching on dry leaves, the snap of a twig. Someone was walking close to where I was sleeping. My heart raced. I held my breath, waiting for the sounds to pass. But they didn't. Instead, the footsteps stopped right outside my tent. For what felt like hours, I lay still, afraid to move or make noise. The only thing I could hear was my own breathing and the faint rustle of leaves. Then the footsteps slowly moved away, disappearing into the darkness. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. When morning finally came, I packed quickly, not daring to stay 1 minute longer. I left no trace, taking only my belongings and the memories of those footsteps in the night. I hiked back the same way I came, constantly looking behind me. The forest that had once felt peaceful now felt threatening and full of eyes watching from the shadows. When I reached my car, relief flooded me. I locked the doors and sat inside, catching my breath. I called the park ranger and told them about the strange fire pits and footprints. They said there had been reports of illegal hunters in the area, people who hunted without permits, sometimes camping illegally, and sometimes behaving dangerously toward other campers. They advised me to report the incident and warned me to be careful if I returned. I promised I wouldn't go back alone. Looking back on that trip, I realized how close I had come to danger. The forest can be beautiful and calm, but it can also hide people who don't belong, people who might hurt others or break the rules. Nature is not just animals and trees. Sometimes the real threat is human. That camping trip taught me to respect the wild, but also to be cautious of the humans who walk among it. It changed how I see the outdoors and reminded me that being alone in the wilderness is never truly safe. You have to be prepared not just for nature, but for the people who share it.